Hey there, folks. Welcome to our Design Fireside chat. My name is Anuj. You've probably seen me a lot today. And I'm here with Elaine Gomez to talk about design, how to break into it. And yeah, Elaine, would you like to give us a introduction, what you do, and where you work?
Of course. Thanks for having me, and I really appreciate it. Hi, everybody. My name's Elaine. Currently, I have three functions. So what is very odd because in most positions in the games industry, you just have your full-time job and that's it. But I'm an overachiever and I do way more than that. Um, but my full-time job is as senior gameplay designer at a fairly new startup. It's a AAA studio called Worlds Untold under the NetEase Games umbrella. And in there, I lead the core mechanics and navigation team, and everything that has to do with the gameplay experience, the features and systems, and all of that is something that I help with organize and try to figure out. On the side, so on weekends in my free time, I run my own indie studio, which I opened last year in 2023 called Midnight Hour Games. And in there, I contract as many friends as would like to be a part of it to just create games together. So sometimes that is client-based games that people that come to us with a contract. But hopefully, moving forward, it'll be our own original IPs that we can get funded and just work on our own. And then my third function is in the advocacy route. I'm currently the vice president of Latinx in gaming, which is one of the award-winning 501(c)(3) nonprofits in the games industry, dedicated specifically to the Latin American design developer and students. So anything that has to do with uplifting Latin American devs, that's what we do. So we provide funding, we provide job opportunities, or at least connections to recruiters and different what's it called? Like not necessarily agencies, but just like hiring talent acquisition folks. Um, and community, mainly more community, trying to bridge the gap between the US and all of Latin America so that folks have a place to be and to uplift each other and connect.
That
So that's who I
networking
am and what
is
I do.
that networking is so crucial. That's part of the reason
Yes.
why we have the summit. I think we actually hosted Latinx in Gaming a couple of years ago for the
Yes.
summit. So it's good to have you on. Great job. Like Latinx in
Thank
Gaming has
you.
been doing great work, and that is super impressive being able to manage all three at once.
I know. I surprise myself sometimes, to be honest.
Uh, let's go ahead and get started with our questions. The first question we'd like to ask is being able to play or look at a game and immediately break down the player experience is an essential skill as a designer. How did you build this skill? And if there are multiple ways that you've built the skill, what do you feel was the most effective for you? Um,
That's a great question. I think that's a skill that you honestly build over time. I don't think you ever get good at it. You'll never be perfect at it. But what really helped me was being interested in game design to the point where I didn't care if there was a game out there that wasn't part of like my genre or wasn't a typical game that I would enjoy playing. I would still play it. And I think that is something that is crucial is it in understanding is a game loop. When you talk about gameplay experience, to me, that's like what is the gameplay loop of this game? How did this team come up with what it would look like to keep me hooked into the game and not put the controller down or like not step away from the keyboard? So I think it's very, very important to try and play as many games as you can, regardless of genre, regardless of type, because what you want to expose yourself to is other people's creativity and other people's design solutions. Like that's really what you want to understand and experience. So having as many resources and it's like having books in a library, to be honest. The more books you have, the more references you have, so that when you create on a team, whether that be at a AAA capacity, indie capacity, or on your own in a game jam, you can pull from so many different sources of inspiration because you have those resources at your disposal. Um, but also, to be honest, outside of games, I always tell people like, watch a bunch of anime, watch a bunch of movies, watch a bunch of shows, go out and like go to museums, like go out on walks. Like I have been inspired and thought through problems about gameplay design and play experience just by just talking to other people that are not in games. It's really nice to be able to find inspiration through different mediums. So I always say that. But at the end of the day, yes, if you're going to be in it as a game dev and a game designer, the more you expose yourself to different types of games from different places in the world made by different people, the better prepared you will be when you are creating to have references that will inspire a mechanic or a system that you are working on.
For that, you mentioned you like to play games that you might not necessarily, they might not be in genres that you like. How do you approach those in terms of being able to tell what is an intended design experience or an intended design gap versus something that might not work design-wise? Because if I'm playing something like an RTS, which I don't normally play, I
Hmm.
can't, it's hard for me to tell what is part of the design and I just don't get it yet versus like
Hmm.
this is actually a flaw
Yeah.
in the genre.
I think it's important at that level to understand game design in its very core. There are some core fundamental principles that guide game design, regardless of genre. And those are like my sources of truth. So there's definitely like a handful of things. And you ask any designer, and they may give you different answers for this. That's just the reality.
Okay.
But there are loads of books out there. That speak of game design theory and establish like a game design vocabulary, right? But to me, there's a handful that you are easily recognizable throughout every game. Um, some of those to me are like an objective. What is the objective? What is it that I have to do as a player? What do I have to do? Where do I need to go? That's usually clear in most games. Some games not so much. A rule set of some kind, like in your world, like what can I do, what I cannot not do, and what are the consequences of like breaking that rule set or something like that. I think that's also very critical, and it exists across all genres and all games. And then from there, it depends on what you're playing, right? Everything's a little bit different. But I go to the fundamental truths for me that I go to for every game, and that's how I can tell like what is part of this game's core design versus what is, I don't know, part of just my play experience because I'm playing the game wrong or I'm not getting something right. But even then, I think that's very informative because that means that I didn't quite, it wasn't communicated to me necessarily well, right? That I
Yeah,
had to do
exactly.
something or go somewhere. But at that point, that's like a UX problem. And I feel like a lot of games suffer from UX issues. Um, and I wish that we had a little bit more considerations with UX because that is a branch of design that comes almost even from tech and like from another area that is not games. And there's a lot of like psychology and real science that goes into user experience.
Yeah,
And sometimes we don't think about that when we create games. But the people who really weave in UX from the beginning and have considerations to that, like those are the types of games that you could really tell, like have really tight loops, and are very clear as to what they want to communicate.
definitely. UX is something that is I'm doing a official game design program at USC right now, and it's learning about UX has been one of the most valuable parts of it because if if I don't like you said, it's informative if you don't know what the core loop is, because then it's like, okay, why didn't I know that? Um,
Mhm.
and that's always an important question to ask is like, did I miss it or was that like did it not get communicated for me?
Right, exactly. And that's also we go to USC. I graduated from there too. Go Trojans.
Hi, that's awesome.
Yeah.
For the next question, I'd like to ask, what skills do you value most when you're working with other designers?
Oh wow. I get asked this a lot and I always say that there's no skills in game design that I like really want people to know. Like more than anything, I want people to know and understand the value of social skills because when we are making games, we truly need to work together. And the worst thing that you can do for me is just be a jerk and not be a good listener, not be able to be flexible with your game design idea because you're holding it so close that you don't want to budge to like change it or iterate on it. And that makes working together and finding solutions together really, really difficult. So I always say the best thing that you can do for yourself is to become a better listener, become flexible with your work. Don't take things personally, especially when people give you feedback. Because at the end of the day, the games that we make are not for us, they're for other people. So we really have to be very cognizant of the fact that whoever is going to enjoy this experience is going to be out in the world, and we are serving them their experience, not our experience. So I always think that people just need to be better humans. I always tell to be a better human. Always be willing to listen to each other, and sometimes stuff happens in life, and I understand that external factors that are out of your control can really affect our emotions. And sometimes we get really angry and frustrated and anxious about things. But it's important to find somebody that you trust in and confide in to be able to share those emotions so that you are not taking it out on the people around you that have nothing to do with what you're going through. And I have been at many studios with many different people, and that is always the case because you cannot take the human being out of the game developer who are still human beings. But I wish that we understood better just how to communicate and how to like really work with each other on a really personal level so that we can support each other professionally, but also personally, because those things come together when we're constantly creating and finding solutions as a team. So, so yeah, I think those social skills are critical. If you are willing to listen, if you are good at communicating, if you are willing to be flexible in things, it's going to be really easy to work with you, and people will want to create with you, whether it be a game jam or, at your job. Like people will come look for you, and that feels really rewarding when people DM you and are like, "Hey, I really value your opinion, Elaine. Can you check this thing out and give me some notes?" Like that feels good.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and like I wish more people could feel the value in that and really take that to heart.
I games are such a collaborative experience that yeah, you really need to be able to communicate with people. And I agree with you wholeheartedly on that last point of being asked for your opinion or if something is good. It's always very like, they trust me with this.
Right. Exactly.
And extension of this question, how does this extend towards working with disciplines that aren't design, or is there a different, do you take like a different approach to interacting with those other disciplines?
I think absolutely. I think that goes across the board. Of course, I have learned now that I have been in the industry now for 8.5 years, I have learned that certain disciplines tend to be communicated with in different ways. Um, it's easier for me to speak with an engineer about a problem using like I don't know, like pseudocode or having a good understanding of what the problem is so that I'm not expecting them to just come up with a solution. Um, so with artists, they love pictures, they love references. So I have learned as a designer that a game design document is not always the best way for me to communicate because people don't like to read. It's like I've been in the industry for so long, and that's the one thing I learned. Like from an executive to like a junior designer, nobody likes to read. So how can I communicate what I need to communicate without overloading people with information? Just giving them the gist of it, enough for them to understand and be able to grok exactly what it is that I'm trying to communicate. So yes, it depends per person. It does sometimes depend per discipline. Sometimes it depends per project. So you just need to be very flexible and have your heart and mind open to be able to modify how you speak or modify your visual materials. It's constant ebb and flow. But I have found some things that work really, really well. Sometimes that's a one pager, sometimes that's a slide deck with like 4 slides and here's all my what I want to communicate. Sometimes it's at a personal level that I need to communicate, like, oh, somebody hurt my feelings, or somebody said something that really took me aback, and I need to DM them and say, hey, can I chat with you for 5, 10 minutes? And those are difficult conversations to be had. That has not been easy, but I am very transparent and honest with people. So it's very easy for me to be like, I just want to work together well. How can we bridge this gap so that this situation doesn't happen again and I feel safe around you or I feel that I can trust you. and things like that. So it really, really, really depends. But it comes with experience. Don't expect overnight to be the most amazing developer, most amazing human in the world that everybody wants to create with. It definitely takes some time, and sometimes you will get knocked down multiple times before you can get back up and know where your boundaries are at, and learn how to stand up for yourself as well, because those situations do happen.
Absolutely. I don't know if you were at if well, while you were at USC, they did the off the record assignment, but I learned very quickly during when making that board game that people do not read the rules themselves. I learned that one
That's
very
true.
quickly.
Yep, yep, yep.
And yeah, like being able to having that level of trust in others and being able to trust that they will either be good to work with in terms of just not being rude or like that's really important in general.
Absolutely.
For our next question, I'd like to start asking about career-wise
Mhm.
questions. The What are new designers often unprepared for when they're getting into the industry, whether they're like looking at indie companies, um, contracting, or landing a big name studio position? What are some things that they might want to look out for that you don't really learn about elsewhere?
Well, I think this goes on like a personal level, because at the end of the day, when you are looking for a place to work, it's not so much about the name on your resume, but you want to make sure that you are looking at a place where you really think you will thrive and that has projects that you will enjoy. Because again, making games takes a long time. So if we look at the current state of the industry, regardless of AAA or indie game, projects tend to be anywhere between 3 to 5 years long, right? Um, Sometimes people don't make it 3 years. Sometimes the turnover is 2 years, 2.5 years. Um, but that's a long time to be around a group of people, right? So if you have issues from the get-go with the values of that company, right? If you know that there are issues and you have heard about the issues, just be really mindful because those things are not going to change just because you're there, right? You may want to create change by being there, and try to have positive impact, but that's also very taxing. And I can speak to that because I have done it, right? I have entered a space knowing that there's some things that don't align, but I want to be the change that I want to see. And I ended up getting pretty burned out. And it's not easy. But I always say, do your research. Who are the founders? Who are the executives? Like, what project is being created? And is that something that you're okay with? Is that something that you will are willing to tolerate? Right? If they don't align with what you want in your life or what you want with your professional career. So that's a big one. Another one is any red flags that you may see, like including salary. Sometimes some of these companies completely lowball everybody when it comes to salary. Do your research and know like what is the average salary in that state? What is the average salary for this position in the country so that you can go in prepared if you are given an offer and can really advocate for yourself and your financial needs, because there's no reason why you should take a job and be financially strained.
Right.
That's going to be super stressful, right? On your day to day. And I know that I have friends who have taken jobs because they are so desperate in their situation that they will take a temporary contract, they will take the freelance contract and not a full time. But as much as you can, fight for a full time if you want a full time, because it's not just about like the money there either. It's about the benefits like health insurance, 401ks, things like that that are super important to have. So always do your research when it comes to like the benefits, the perks that the company is offering, what the base salary looks like versus like any type of um, extra compensation or bonuses that come by. A lot of AAA studios have like extra things outside of your base salary. Um, but it's like, can you live off of your base salary? Like that's the important part because that's the paycheck you're going to receive every 2 weeks, right? And if that's not enough, then you really need to make sure that you're making the best decision for yourself. Um, but let's see, outside of that, because those are the major things that I look for when I'm like applying. But another one to me is like team composition. I know that it's important to me to see other women on the team and to see people of color on the team because I've already experienced what it's like to be the only one and how ostracizing and isolating that is. And I don't want to go through that again. Um, so because I don't want to go through that again, I make sure that I am very selective of where I'm even applying to because it's important to me. And you will right off the bat know if that's something that's important to the team because you will find pictures of the teams online and you can clearly see who's there and who's not, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So to me, that means also leadership. So if there are no lead designers, lead programmers, directors, or executives that are people of color or women, to me, that's a huge red flag. Because then that means like where are your values then if there's no people making decisions that look like me or that advocate for people like me, right? But again, that's something that it's important to me. That doesn't have to be important to everyone. But just make sure that you have your list of non-negotiables, things that you won't be swayed just because they give you a nice number and you will have a nice name on your resume. Like those things like come and go. But at the end of the day, you want to be happy at the place that you are at and you want to succeed. And that is very closely tied with how people are going to treat you on a day to day. If you are miserable and people treat you without respect, you're not going to make good stuff because you're going to
Yeah.
feel it in your heart. You're going to be emotionally exhausted and defeated every day and you're going to feel imposter syndrome and all those things. But if you're at a place where you're uplifted and supported and every day people are telling you you're doing an awesome job, like keep doing great work, um, this design is kick ass, like this system is dope. Like, of course, you're going to feel so good and you're going to feel empowered and you're going to feel great. And that's how we all want to feel, right? We all want to feel like we matter in the whole, right? That our
Right.
work and like our voice is relevant and is valued by the people among us. So, yeah. But developing that sense of self-awareness and understanding what you want, you develop that over time as well. That didn't come to me straight out of college. Like I was still
That
trying to figure out who I was.
yeah,
I
definitely.
didn't
That's
know who
something
I was.
it takes a long time. Like it took me a while
Yeah,
to figure out on my end, like to even just get like a start base idea of okay, what teams and what do I want to make? And
exactly.
oftentimes if it is those 2 year turnovers,
Hmm.
that can be because the environment didn't work for them. So that is
Exactly.
definitely really important. Um,
Exactly.
with regards to salary like how would you recommend students approach negotiating or talking about their salary? Because that is
Yeah.
often that is very, very difficult, especially if you're getting like
Yes.
your first job in the industry. It's like, oh, I like how can students best fight for themselves and fight for their own compensation for their talents?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, like I said before, there's a lot of research that is involved in that. So there are several resources online that I personally go to when I am trying to negotiate salary and benefits and things like that. So a good one is Glassdoor. Most companies have a page on Glassdoor and people report their salaries. And people also leave reviews for companies as well so that you can get an idea of what it's like to work there. So I recommend looking at Glassdoor and seeing the salary breakdowns there. Sometimes they are present for exactly the position that you're looking for. Sometimes they're not. So if that's not the case, I would then look at the state where that studio is at, because that's how they're going to usually gauge how much they're going to offer you. Um, this changes a bit with being remote
Yes,
because
definitely.
now that when you are remote, then it's dependent on where you live, right? So I am currently working at Worlds Untold. They're based in Vancouver, Canada, but my salary range is based on where I live, which is New Jersey. And New Jersey and New York are very high cost of living states. So the salary reflects the higher cost of living versus if I were to be living in Ohio or Michigan or something like that. So that changes, right? If you're on site, definitely look at the state where the studio is. And from there, you can do some research online and say, what is the average or median salary for this position at this level, and then you can use that as your gauge. Never ever give a single number. Like never
Mhm.
say, I want to be at 75,000, excuse me.
No worries.
Yes, that's advice that I was given multiple times. Like never say, I want to be paid $75,000. Like never give one number, always give a range. Because more often than not, you'd be surprised that if you give a range, sometimes they go towards the middle or higher end of the range that you give. So you could actually be like pigeonholing yourself to a lower number just because that's exactly what you said. And so they're like, okay, and they said 75, I'm gonna give them 75 when you could have gotten 83, right?
Makes a lot of
So
sense.
always give a range. And in the state of California, as we know, a lot of game studios are in California, they actually give you that information up front. So when you apply to a job and you see the information, they'll say this position is of salary range from X to Z. And then that way you can know, and from that um, range, you can then figure out, okay, this is where I want to get paid. But yeah, it takes a little bit of research to be able to do that to best negotiate. But always keep in mind, like your education. When I graduated from USC, that was a master's in interactive media and games. So I
Mhm.
use that to my advantage because that is a higher end, that's a second degree, right?
Yes.
And on top of that, I was already making games. I had a portfolio built. So if you are all also making games and you're publishing them on itch.io or Steam, like you already have a portfolio, right? So
Yeah.
use that to your advantage as well because those games are released. So that means, yes, I have created X amount of released titles because they're out there for the public to download, right? So use that for your as your advantage as well in your resumes. If you have 3, 4 games that you have already made and are in itch.io or on your portfolio, yes, say I with a game designer release with 4 games. And that really helps when people are reading your resume and such. But yeah, I think the best thing that you can do for yourself is do your due diligence. Figure out what those numbers are and figure out what you need as well.
Mhm.
So if you know what you need for rent, if you know like your monthly stuff, make sure that you have enough to pay all of that and have extra, right? So it's all a numbers game and it's all different for all of us. But doing the calculations in advance will help you advocate for what you can ask for when you get an offer.
And I think a lot of students can potentially get maybe hung up on that idea of, oh, they require to have 3 to 4 released games already. When, yeah, everybody who's in this case right now has a released game.
Mm-hmm.
The USC program, you work on a ton of released games
Yes,
in that program.
right.
So, and
Exactly.
also, go ahead.
No, I said exactly.
Okay. And similar to what you're saying, I actually that range idea is really important. And even when companies are posting on like LinkedIn in California, they'll have that range. I feel like if you see a very wide range, you should potentially be a little bit worried about that.
Yes,
Just
definitely.
because why is it why is there a $50 pay range here?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And same thing with so I've seen that a lot with actually Netflix games. So they'll have a position open and it'll be like the salary ranges from 9,000 to 600,000. You're like, "What?" Like you can get up to $500,000? What's going on? But
Oh
that's
my God.
probably just for them to let you know like, "Hey, like for the right candidate with the right experience, like that's the range that we could be. So use that to your advantage." But also, don't be like a junior designer being like, "Yes, I want $500,000 salary." Like, come on, like let's be realistic too
Yeah,
as well.
I wish, but unfortunately, no.
Right.
9,000's too little. 600,000 might be a little bit on the higher end.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I'd like to ask, what did you feel you were unprepared for when you were in that stage of entering the industry?
What was I unprepared for?
Yes.
I really felt unprepared for a lot of the design tests. And they change depending on who you are, like where you're applying to. Some of them were more technical than others, and some of them were straight up coming with design solutions for games that the company had made. I was like, why? Like, what do I need to solve this issue that you had prior? I felt like I should have gotten paid for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt like completely unprepared for a design test because that was something that in school we never touched on. And because they're so different everywhere that I applied to, I didn't have like a good point of reference. I just knew that some of these tests are really long and they take about a week to do. Granted, sure, you could go through an entire test in one day, but it's just so mentally taxing to do that much design work and problem solving in a short period of time. So I can see why they give you a week so that you could time manage and parse it out a little bit better over a few days. But yeah, the design tests to me, even to this day, I find them sometimes very, very difficult. And some studios are just notorious for giving really difficult design tests, whereas other studios I haven't had to do any design test and I have been hired. So it's very interesting the way that design tests work. I'm not sure about programming tests. I know that at some studios those tend to be a bit more rigorous than at others as well. Well, they'll ask you to like how to architect a system instead of being like, hey, how would you implement this tool or this feature set with a design team? So it's all over the place, and that's why to me I was unprepared for those.
Definitely. I've had a couple interviews where they say you need to sign an NDA, and I'm just like, what? Do I have to sign an NDA for the interview? Um,
Oh yeah.
what are you planning
Yeah, yeah.
for that?
Usually with the NDA so that they can share stuff with you about the
Yeah,
project and then bind you so that you don't talk about it with other people. So it's like
exactly.
you're never meant to talk about this super secret project ever with anyone.
Yeah, it's only for you.
Right, exactly. Only for you. But it's just a means for them to actually be able to communicate, because if not, they won't be able to.
Definitely, that makes a lot of sense. We're coming up to around the halfway point, so we'll ask a couple more questions from our list, and then we can start talking about, or we can start taking audience questions. So, for our next question, I'd like to ask, say there's an entry-level position, level, design, technical, etc.
Mhm.
What are the core skills that you want to see in in the portfolio to know whether or not somebody can do that job up to par?
Gotcha. With level design specifically,
Just any type of
any
design,
design?
but yeah, any design. And if you want to talk about your specific area of expertise, then that would also be fantastic.
Yeah, I think I could speak that the most since that's what I do on a day to day. So if we were to have an entry level or junior gameplay designer position on my team and I was hiring for that, um, definitely would look at the portfolio. And what I would specifically look at wouldn't be so much design documentation, because I feel like anybody can write some stuff down. But more so, I would be looking at gameplay videos or actually downloading the games that you have on your portfolio and playing them to see what you were trying to communicate with mechanics, what we were trying to communicate with specific features and systems that you had articulated that you designed or worked on. So that's what I would be looking at. It's like, what were you thinking and trying to come up with this idea? How did you execute it? What is lacking? What is the strengths? What are the weaknesses? And then I'll be able to gauge all of those things to figure out, okay, like this person has a lot of potential. They still have a lot of growth to do, but I see a lot of potential in certain areas when it comes to gameplay. Um, a really big no-no to me would be somebody that has zero like GIFs or videos or games that I can download. If they're only screenshots and only like documents, I wouldn't have anything to go by off of to know. Like I don't see any examples of the type of design that you're doing and actually have it working. Um, like it's seeing it come to real life.
That
So
last
that's
part
what I would
feels
be
very
looking
important.
at. Huh?
That last part of like of seeing it come to life and having
Yes.
these ideas that work feels really
Yes,
important.
exactly. And they don't even have to work perfectly, right? Because I have seen folks who have lots of prototypes in their portfolios, and that is excellent. Like I think that for specifically gameplay design, if you have a portfolio of a bunch of prototype mechanics, all different types, and they're all gray box, but you clearly communicated this was supposed to be a bubble gun, and the bubble gun has these goals, and the objective is this. And I can clearly see that in like a 15-second video that you put together. That is more valuable than a 12-page game design document. That's just the reality of how being a designer is in the industry. I need to know that you can come up with ideas and you can come up with designs, but you know how to bring them to life from words on a page to an engine example.
A follow-up question for that one would be, what are some examples of portfolio pieces that would best showcase these skills? And like you said, it's really just important to be able to tell. Yeah, it doesn't have to be like super successful, the best
Mhm.
design in the world. It
Exactly.
you can make like it's important that you at least try it as something and that
Yes,
you learn from it, most importantly.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Like I said before, it's like as long as you can showcase it in some way. Sometimes that could be a wireframe on Figma where you're trying to show some type of like user experience or a game state change and you don't want to do it in Engine. You
Mhm.
can easily do it with Photoshop, Illustrator, or Figma, or anything like that. And I think that's very, very valuable. Um, but at the end of the day, I think that now, at least in the industry, in the current state of the industry where we are at, a lot of designers are now like little part like beginner intermediate programmers. We can implement the designs that we come up with. Sometimes it's very critical, especially in an indie studio where like everybody
Absolutely.
needs to know a little bit of everything and pull your weight. But just because you don't have the technical skill doesn't mean that you can't get help for it either. So that's something that I always tell people. If you come up with a design and you can't fully implement it on your own, it's totally okay to get a friend to help you or use a tutorial on YouTube to put it together and then say, hey, like I used this tutorial or this, give credit to the person that helped you put it together. But at the end of the day, you have an example to show. So I could not harp on that enough. If you really want to have a strong game design portfolio, you need to show your designs working. It's not just words on a paper. I'm talking about actual prototypes in Game Maker, on Godot, in Unreal, in Unity. Doesn't matter what engine you use, really, truly. It's just the matter of did this get executed? Did this is idea executed? Um, Level of polish, again, does not matter. It's nice to see high level of polish, don't get me wrong, because that really lets the person that's seeing your portfolio know that you know what it takes. You can pay attention to detail and you can see something through to a high quality. But it's totally okay if it's gray box if you just want to show the intent of an idea versus like a full-fledged implementation of that idea. But all of those go anywhere between that range of like first concept, first playable prototype, all the way through like most polished playable. Anything in that range works. But if it lives in your portfolio and people can see it and play it, that is your best bet.
Types of prototypes. They don't have to be the best they can be. They don't have to be like
Mhm.
super polished. They
Right?
need to be able to you need to be able to also glean information from them, like not just
Absolutely.
kind of throw it out there and just not be able to get anything.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
I think right now, as we will go ahead and start transitioning into audience questions, and should we need to, we can come back to questions from the sheet. So for our first question, we got from Solid Parker on Twitch. Where do design teams encounter the most barriers to getting their concepts and implementations across? Do these come from the interpersonal dynamic, from stakeholders who are looking for specific gameplay experiences, or from the players? So where does that come from?
Like the intention of the design?
Or where do they encounter barriers when it comes
Oh,
to
they
going
encounter
from design?
barriers. Oh, I see. So a lot of places. And again, this depends on the project that you're on, the team that you're with, and what you're trying to solve. So sometimes barriers come from leadership, where leadership wants to see something very specific, and the team just went a different route. And then there needs to be some reconciliation in some way of that design. So that's one. And that happens a lot in AAA, to be honest. Um, it's very common to get an executive come in one day or a lead or a director and say, I was playing Helldivers 2 over the weekend and I really liked this one thing that they did. Can we implement that? You have no idea how often that happens.
Oh my God. That's
It
unfortunate to
happens all
hear.
the time. It happens all the time. But as designers, we need to be calm, cool, and collected and be like, that's really great idea, but this is the reason why we're doing these things. We could maybe try out the prototype. We could maybe try to weave it in somehow because I can understand where you're coming from and I can see where you see the value in it. But let's try to figure it out with what we can do, with the bandwidth that we have, with the resources that we have, because time is money when you're making game dev too, right? And sometimes you got to figure out what is actually a priority and what is not. So sometimes that happens. Another barrier could just be that we don't quite know where we want to take a feature or a mechanic or a thing. There may be design pillars that we have already that are high level that the directors give us or leadership gives us. But sometimes we have to fill in the gaps, especially when you are starting a brand new project and building it from the ground up. And you don't have answers for things. And you're just trying to create prototypes and trying to define the thing, but it's just not easy to get to the right answer. And that's a huge challenge. And a lot of times we do like a, a dozen prototypes of the same thing. It's just like we're not landing and it's not working. And sometimes you just need to scrap it and start anew. So there's a lot of different little barriers. Excuse me, I need to cough.
Yes, of course. I did not know that the
But yeah.
having an executive come in and just suggest a completely unrelated um
Yes, that
idea.
happens a lot. Like that happens a lot. And I have a lot of friends all over the industry. So no studio or company is exempt. It happens everywhere. And some of them are truly horror stories. Truly, truly horror stories. Others are just not so bad. It's things that they were able to like, it was just a little bump on the road and they were able to get over it. But yes, to this person's point, sometimes there is a difficult designer on the team. And you really need to figure out how to work with them. And there's a little book that somebody shared with me called How to Hug a Porcupine. And it's a very short book, but it's about how to deal with difficult people and how to find like the soft underside belly of the porcupine so that you can give it a hug and like rub its belly versus like giving it a hug with all the spikes out. So I really
Definitely.
recommend that book if anybody wants to read it. It's very short and sweet, but it really gives you an insight into some people are just like that and you can't change them. And you need to figure out how to be like talk to them and like approach them in a way where they don't feel attacked, but that you can work with them and find solutions to the problems that you're having. Because that's just the reality. Nobody's going to be perfect when making a game, whether at a professional level at a studio or making a little game jam game. Like nobody's going to be perfect. You're always going to have an issue with somebody, or there always will be a problem because it's just the nature of being human, right? But you can control how you react and you can control how you speak to people, right? So yes, I have had to deal with that too, and that is a barrier in creating having a solution for a design or being able to meet a deadline because somebody didn't do what they said they needed to do. Somebody was out for a week because they were sick and now it's on you. Sometimes the person was too difficult and you were not able to find a solution. So now it's going to take a little longer. So all of those things and then some, because there are so many barriers to finding the right design for things. But at the end of the day, coming together as a team and figuring out together is the best solution and not siloing and trying to do things on your own. That never works. That has never worked for me.
Going back to the game dev is collaborative. Make sure to
Yes.
recognize that and remember that. Um, we have we have a question regarding the design test that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Is that the same thing as beta testing, or is that a different thing? And I think I know the answer, but I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah. Completely different, right? So yes, the it's very valid to test games at early access, at beta, at alpha, right? Those are that's very valuable feedback for a dev team that's actively working on a game. But the type of design tests that I'm talking about are the ones that are given to you when you are applying to a game design position, and it's part of the hiring process. So you do several interviews. these interviews involved the creative director, the design director, lead designers, and other folks from the team that you may be getting into if you're giving an offer. So sometimes that looks like engineers, artists, sound designers. It could be anybody on the team that will actively collaborate with you if you get hired. But at a certain point in that interview process and hiring process, some studios, and I say some because not all of them do this, but some give you a design test to test your design sensibilities and your design skills. So it's like, okay, you say you know how to do gameplay design. Okay, here is a document and there's 5 questions on it. Some of them are game design theory questions, like what is your approach to gameplay, the design of gameplay features? Like how do you come about like designing a feature? And then you have to explain it within like 2 paragraphs or something like that. And another question may be, hey, like this is let me pick a random studio. Let's say I don't know, let's say Ubisoft, right? Let's say that we're applying to the next Assassin's Creed game, right? And we want to be junior designers on Assassin's Creed, whatever the heck, right? Um, one of the design test questions may be um, there was a challenge in Assassin's Creed 2 where players didn't understand how to do XYZ. How would you solve for it? So then if you haven't played Assassin's Creed 2, then be like, okay, now you have to play it for a little bit so that you can understand what that issue is that they're talking about, and then do design thinking to solve the question that they're asking you. So it can get that granular. Um, and I have had other design tests where they're very specific about the thing they want me to design. So they'll specifically say, we want you to design an activity for this game that we are creating, and it has to have these parameters and requirements. How would you go about it? And then I will have to design it, right? So you use sketches, you use references, you may go into Photoshop and do like an overlay. And at that point, you cannot go into Unity and Unreal and like make a prototype necessarily, unless you're like really great and you can do that in a short amount of time. More often than not, these are paper designs that you are sharing with these folks. Um, and yeah, and you package all of that up in a PDF and you send it over and cross your fingers. And if they like it, they move you forward through the interview process. So that's the design test that I'm talking about. And
I
they're
actually
pretty
have
stressful.
I actually had like a design test as like a subcomponent of a game programming interview
Mm,
once. And part of that
interesting.
was playing the game that they set. They wanted me to make a weapon for it. So part of that was playing the game and figuring out, okay, what weapons are there and what do they do already?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
they definitely don't want me to just make this gun part two. It does the exact same
Exactly.
thing.
Exactly, yeah. And at that point, that's where the design problem solving skill sets come in. Because if you are very wise in doing a design test like that, you will see, you will play the game and look at all the guns, but then you will also analyze what guns are missing,
Mhm.
right? What are some features that would be cool that are missing? And I sometimes have even gone into forums on like Reddit or Steam reviews and check out what people are saying of things that they would like to see and like use that as inspiration too, and then combine and come up with like a design that speaks to like this is what the player base has been asking for, but also this is something that I see missing that is not present, and here's my idea to like solve for that. So yeah, we have to be very information savvy when you're a designer, especially when doing a design test, because you want them to show how resourceful you are too, that you can
Yeah.
really come up with ideas that perhaps other people don't come up with.
So we've got one more question, and then we'll end with our closing question. So that question is, are game design and game programming related? I.e., can a game designer work as a programmer and vice versa? Uh, yeah,
Yes,
that's it.
they're very related. In fact, at one of my previous studios, I was actually mentoring a gameplay engineer that was transitioning into a game design position. So it's very possible. There's a lot of skill sets that overlap because you need to have somewhat of a game design thinking in order to do gameplay programming or games programming. Because how then is the designer going to interact with a system that you are creating? right? If they don't know how to use it, or it's not going to serve the purpose that it needs to. So they're very intertwined. Um, I work with gameplay programmers every day. They're part of like my core mechanics team at my job. So we literally half designers and half engineers, and that those are the people that come up with the gameplay mechanics together. So very intertwined, and it's possible to shift to and fro, but there are certain fundamentals that need to change when you are going from engineer to design and vice versa. So engineers tend to be very qualitative, and it's very like there's little gray areas sometimes. It's very like, no, it needs to be this way or this way. But very design is very flexible. So it's
Yes,
like there is no one answer to anything. There is multitudes of answers, but finding the right one is all based on balance and feedback and all of these other things. So there are certain fundamental like ways of thinking and perspectives that definitely need to change when you are looking at games from those perspectives, engineering versus design. But can definitely work in concert and have to work in concert, or else games cannot get made. Right.
definitely. Um, there's that really important thing of being able to being able to just kind of adapt in between. And yeah,
Mhm.
I don't, there was I think one of the directors I worked with at USC mentioned that at Naughty Dog they claim that their designers can be programmers at other studios.
Mm,
Um, and
yes.
while that may not be necessarily 100% true everywhere, you will still need to kind of like that it's more related than you might expect at
Yes.
first.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And some studios, yeah, have that. Like I know Naughty Dog definitely has an expectations for designers to be scripters and be able to script. But we're not talking about, oh, go in the back end and write C++ code. It's like visual scripting. So like
Right.
the engineers come up with those tools and those systems for you, and then you use them to manipulate it and modify things so that you can get things working in engine. And that's most often the case everywhere. I don't know any designer that is going back into like source code and like doing things. I don't know anybody. Unless you're an indie dev and making your own stuff, right? Like
That's a different
that's a different
ball game entirely.
conversation.
Yeah.
But for the professional designer in the industry, more often than not, you're talking about visual scripting and using tools that have been in place from the engineering department so that you can do your job, right? And then if you can't do your job and there's something missing, then you can go and speak because you have that common vocabulary like, hey, I actually need a Boolean or I need an integer that will allow me to modify this thing so that I can easily test it in engine or whatever it may be. And that's where it really, really helps to have the same vocabulary and be able to communicate with engineers as a designer. Because that way they can solve those issues a lot easier than trying to go in your head and trying to parse it out themselves.
Definitely. For our final question, I'd like to ask, do you have any general advice you'd like to share with students who are interested in the field of game design?
Yes, I have so many pieces of advice. For one, um, keep making games. Like, if I would have just um, focused on the work that I'm doing at my full-time job, I don't think I would be as strong of a designer as I am today. Because I am constantly doing game jams, constantly doing little prototypes on the side that don't go anywhere. It's just for me, for my own knowledge, for exercising my creativity. But I'm constantly wanting to like learn and grow and be better. And I would say if you really want to excel at the craft, right? Because game design is an art form, it's a craft. You can only get better at it by doing it more. The more you do it, the better intuition you will have, the better design sensibilities you will build. Um, and the more solutions oriented you will be because you will not see things one dimensionally, you will see it from all sides. And those are the most valuable designers that you can have on your team working with you is folks who can really find solutions to any problem and can find multiple solutions to that problem. Those are like the best designers that I've ever worked with, right? So I would say that keep creating, keep making games, keep making prototypes. It doesn't have to be full-fledged games, just little things that you like. Want to build a character controller that has whatever you have? Do it. Want to build a I don't know, a weird game mechanic that makes something grow, do it. Like that's all you need. It just takes a little bit of your time to learn and grow. Um, and the next thing is, even though you may not be able to afford games, right, buying them constantly to play them, at least be knowledgeable of the games that are being made now. And I'm not talking about the games that are being released. I'm talking the games that are being developed right now. And the reason why I recommend you take a look at that and see what people are working out right now is that when it comes time for you to enter the games industry and have your role, right? You always want to look a few years ahead because that's the course of where the games industry is going, right? So the games that are being made today have all of these things that were popular and whatever from like 3 or 4 years ago, right? And we won't see things that are from today until 2028 or 2029, right? So you always want to be a step ahead of all the trends that are happening because what is popular today is not necessarily going to be popular 5 years from now. So you want to just make sure that you have your eyes open and seeing what people are creating so that you can get inspired and all of that. Yeah. And um, step outside of games to get inspiration. If that's like the one tip that you take away, let it be that. Like
Mhm.
watch movies, watch shows, read books, comics, manga, watch anime, whatever it is that you love and enjoy. Even if that means hiking, swimming, biking, it doesn't have to be like a hobby where you're on your own. You can be with other people, but just get inspired and don't forget to write down those inspirations. Like we all have design books.
Mhm.
I have this is my design notebook for work and my personal. But anytime that I have an idea, anything at all, even if it's a sentence, I write it down so that I don't forget. And sometimes years later, I act on them. It's like, oh, I remembered like 3 years ago, I had this idea of this thing, now I can do it. So definitely like write those down. Never lose your inspirations and any type of mechanics or designs that come to mind. Always archive them somewhere, document them so that you can keep them and you can look back and maybe they can be sources of inspiration on another project in the future or something like that.
We're having a fun time. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. We had a really great time. Those were really helpful answers. I have written a few of them down on my own personal Discord server for notes.
Thank you
Um,
so much. Thanks so much for the invitation. I really enjoyed the fireside chat.
yes. For upcoming, we have our closing ceremony. This was the final event of day one. Thank you so much to Elaine once again for coming to speak with us, and we will see you all in a bit for the closing ceremony.
Thank you, News. Bye all.